Yeah, thank you and welcome to my session about progressive web applications. And first things first, I would like to mention this documentation link. If you, I'm doing an online demo later, and if you want to follow it online or later when you are at home, please load that file. It's a Google Docs documentation, and it includes step-by-step tutorial of what I'm doing here. And okay, UI5 goes PWA, or I could have named it how to get rid of your native apps. So I want to ask you one question. Who of you loves to install and work with native apps on smartphones and tablets and so on? And a few of them. And who would prefer to work on the internet, in the web, all the time? Yeah, okay, I'm right here. The other way around, I would have packed my package and would have left the room. Okay then, let's start then. What is a progressive web application? Progressive web application is a web application that behaves like a native app. And my prediction is that progressive web applications will replace most of native apps in the long term. Not in the short term, but in the long term. That's my personal prediction. Okay, here we see two examples of progressive web applications. Twitter already has a very good progressive web application, and the other one is Flipboard. That's also very good. Later on, I show you some more links to examples. Okay, let's ask, why are there native apps? Native apps have a good user retention, so there is an icon on the home page and people love to click at the icon and they go back to the application, and the producer of the application has always a connection to the user. That's one point. Another one is native apps used to have better user experience than web applications. With modern web UI frameworks, that's not true anymore, as we all know, because we are at UI5con here. Offline work is possible, of course. Then support of native features of smartphones is possible with native applications, yeah, also true. And you can send push notifications or get push notifications as user of the native app. So what bring progressive web application to us? Progressive web applications are reliable, offline, responsive, secure, and engaging. That's part of the specification of progressive web applications. So what does it mean? Reliable means that you always get a meaningful content, whatever you do. You can also work offline. At which level of offline functionality is supported depends on the developer who developed the progressive web applications. You can either work completely offline, if everything is cached on your smartphone, or you get meaningful placeholders that inform you, please come back later when you are online or so. But in no case a progressive web application shows you a 404 error. It should always respond with a meaningful content. So offline data. Progressive web applications support offline work. They work as a proxy between your web application, the UI5 or other web application, and the web server. And as such a proxy, they intercept every network request that's going from your application to the web server. And in this interception phase, the progressive web application, of course, can cache the responses, the requests and the responses, and if you are offline later, it just returns the responses that are in the cache to you or to the user. And as soon as you go online again with your PWA application, the cache gets synchronized and you are always at the newest version of the application. So responsive, I think, don't have to talk about it today. We are at UI5con, work with UI5, and we know what responsibility of an application means. Securities, web application, progressive web applications are secure by default, so they only support network traffic via HTTPS. There is no HTTP possible with PWAs, except if you are developing your app on the local host, you can work with HTTP there. Engaging. PWAs are also engaging like native apps. So there is an icon on the home screen, like as it is with native apps. There are push notifications. And so the PWAs benefit from the same features of like native apps. And additionally, you can, as with native apps, also work in full screen mode. So the user benefits of PWAs over native apps are, they are easy to discover. So you just Google for them and find your progressive web application. You don't have to go to an app store or so, just Google for it. They are linkable. You can send a link to a progressive web application to your friend, to your colleague, because PWAs are simply web applications. There is no installation and no update. You don't have to go to an app store and install this application. It is automatically installed if you call as soon as you call the URL, and the browser supports progressive web applications. Another point is secure. I already mentioned it, but that's also a user benefit. Developer benefits of PWAs over native apps. That's very interesting for me as a developer, because I never understood why I should develop 3 or 4 apps for iOS, Windows, Android, and for the web in different languages. So there is only one single application you have to develop. You only develop your web application, in our case your UI5 application. You can use any server language. You have to learn Swift, C# or whatever. You work in that language that you like, Java, Node.js, whatever. They are easy to deploy because you don't have to go to an app store. You just publish your website and the application is deployed. You bypass app stores. You don't have to go to Apple's App Store, Google's App Store, Windows App Store, or Microsoft App Store, and wait for the verification of the guys there. You don't need it. Yeah. And what's about SEO? Because PWAs are regular websites or web apps. You don't have special needs for SEO. If your web app also has a good SEO, it's fine. Yeah. Which browsers currently support PWA? There is, of course, all modern browsers support PWAs. Chrome on desktop, Android, then Safari supports it in the meantime. Firefox and Microsoft Edge does support it. Microsoft IE 11 does not support it currently. So now I want to lead you to 2 interesting resources you might want to look at. That's what web can do today. If you call this URL on your smartphone, you get a list of which native features are already supported by web technology and your browser on your smartphone. And as you see in the list, there are a lot of native features that are already supported by web applications or by browsers. The other resource I want to show you is Can I Use? As we are all web developers, we probably know this URL, because there you can look which function, which functionality is supported with which browser and which version. That's a useful resource when you develop a web application or even a progressive web application. So let's go to the technical details. Which techniques are used for progressive web application? There are only 4 techniques. Meta tags, you have to add some meta tags to your index HTML file. There is a manifest JSON, like we use it in UI5 already. And there are service workers. Service workers are the heart of progressive web applications. I show you in a moment the details. And push notifications are used. So I switch these slides here because I go into detail when I show you the online demo. And we will start with it now. As I mentioned, there is this document, this Google Docs document where you can where you find a tutorial, step-by-step tutorial, which you can follow when you're at home. Okay, and I will start the development now. For the development, I'll use the Glitch platform. Glitch is a great platform, I think, because you can develop web applications online in the cloud, or in the cloud, and test them. You have a Node.js server under the hood and can develop the back-end part and the front-end part as well. And a nice feature about Glitch is, or in Glitch is, that we can remix a project. I uploaded a project, I prepared a project, that's a regular UI5 application. And when you click at remix this, it forks this application into your own space, and you can change and develop the application there. So here you see the application. Here's the regular web application. It's a UI5 application with controllers, views, and here we have the component.js, the index HTML. I have to wear my glasses. Index HTML, and we can start the application by clicking at the show button, and now the application loads. That's my consultant profile I created with UI5, and when you click here at tile, you get more details about me, about my experience, and so on. And I decided to develop it with UI5 as a proof of work for me. Okay, then let's begin to convert. Oh no, I show you one more thing. Let's go into offline mode and see what happens then. Go to the network tab, I go to offline mode, I refresh the page, and bam, no internet connection. That's German and means no internet connection. Or network connection, no internet. Okay, that's not surprisingly, or that doesn't come surprisingly. We have to convert, or we start converting the app into a PWA now. The first thing I have to do, into this project I added code snippet txt you can also use when you follow the steps at home. there are all the code snippets. It contains all the code snippets that you use for manipulating or converting the application. So we first have to add meta tags to the index HTML. Let's do it. Meta tags beneath the title. These are PWA meta tags, and I don't go into details now about every meta tag. Go to Mozilla, Google, have a look at the specification for PWA. The tags are described there. Okay, next thing we have to do, we have to include a manifest JSON into our index HTML. This manifest JSON, or because UI5 already has a manifest JSON, we can reuse it. We just enhance it. So the location of the manifest JSON is web app manifest JSON, and that is my UI5 manifest JSON. And we simply have to add some attributes or some parameters to this file. Where is it? Okay, at the top. And what does it contain? It contains two names. We only need one. A short name, some icons, some colors here, and from here on the UI5 part starts. So these informations are the only ones you need for your progressive web application. So let's go to the next part. To be preloading. We heard a lot about preloading in other sessions today, and what I would suggest is that you load all your libraries, UI5 libraries, asynchronously and in advance. The libraries I use, the UI5 libraries I use, are these 4 libraries, and I add this to the Bootstrap. And then you should also load them asynchronously. We already heard about it. And asynchronous loading is important for PWA applications, because synchronous loading is not forbidden by the specification, but not supported by Google. Firefox supports it, Google doesn't support it. So it's always better to load them asynchronously, and of course synchronous XHR calls are deprecated. It's also good practice to do that. Okay, this is the asynchronous load. Now we have to add one more startup parameter. This is wait for theme. And if we don't add this parameter to our Bootstrap code, the browser also already begins to render the application before all the files are loaded, and then it tries to reload or tries to load the files, and this will lead to an error if we are offline. So it's good, or we should add this parameter to the Bootstrap code. Okay. Now the first test. We can start the first test. Let's start the application again, and let's have a look what changed. Google has Google has here an application tab. And this application tab shows details about your progressive web application. And as we are, or of course we are already maintained the index HTML, the meta tags, and the manifest JSON, it shows the information that we inserted in the manifest JSON. So there's the title, the name of the application, the icons, colors, and if you would want to, you can already add your application to the home screen. But I skip this, and we'll do it later. Close it. And I carry on with my code snippets, with my conversion. We now come to the heart of progressive web applications, the service worker. A service worker first has to be registered. I do this in my index.html file, just below this. No, yeah. Below this, I call a register or loaded registered worker.js file. I add this file to my project, go to the code snippets, copy the content of the file, yeah. Here we are. So what does this file or this JavaScript snippet do? It first looks if the service worker is supported in your browser, in your navigator object. If it is not supported, nothing happens. It works like a regular web application. You don't have a progressive web application, but you can work with your application online like before. If it is supported by your browser, this function adds an event listener to the load event of the window, and in this function, it registers the service worker at the navigator, at the browser object. And it does this by calling another JavaScript file. I have to add to my project. Yeah, come on. Go to the code snippets, copy the content of this file. It's a bit longer, but I will describe it in a moment. Come on. Okay, yeah. Service worker there. Okay, I copied it, and I will not go into the code now. I prefer to show you a graphic or a few graphics that I created. This is a tutorial, as I mentioned, and this has much more information that I can tell you now. But service workers, yeah. In general, service workers, they run totally separate from your web application. So they are not, they don't rely on your web application. Your web application does not have to be opened in the browser. The service worker works in the background. That's a very important part. And a service worker runs through different phases or states when it gets installed and it's running. The first state is the installing state. There it surprisingly gets installed. And after it is installed, it gets activated. Then after activation, it goes into an idle state. And in this idle state, it responds to events, fetch events, message events. And yeah, there you can, in this event handlers, I'll come to them in a moment, you can implement your service worker code. So let's go down to the events. Okay, here we are. Is it big enough? Yeah. The install event, in my case, and that's a good best practice, I think, the install event tries to open a cache with a given name. If it can't open the cache, it creates a cache for you. It's a service worker owned cache. It does not have anything to do with the browser cache. That's separately. Then after it opened the cache, it preloads resources that should be cached into this cache, and that's it. Then the activate event arrives, and when it arrives, I delete old caches that are not needed any longer. Because with every new version of a service worker, you probably need new files that are preloaded, and you do that via the installation phase, and then you can get rid of the old caches in this activation phase. And the next phase is the fetch, the fetch event, and the fetch event is the most interesting in our case, because the fetch event is called every time your web application calls or makes a request to the web server. Then the service worker intercepts this request and does anything with it. And what it does is the following. It first checks if the request is already cached, and if the request is cached, you can see it here, it simply returns the cached response, and that's it. If it's not cached, in this case, it tries to fetch the resource from the server, and if it's successful, it saves the response in the cache and returns the response. If it's not successful, because we are, for example, offline, it can do anything, and in my case, I return a dummy response. I'll show you in a moment where this appears. So this is the behavior that progressive web applications are reliable. They always respond with meaningful content. Okay, then let's go to the code again. We now have code snippets. We have, oh no, we go to the test. Okay, yeah. We test the application now. We have our service worker and everything is fine. I started the application. I go to the application tab. See, there is this manifest, and now there is a service worker. This is activated at 16:33. That's our time now. And when you click here at clear storage, you see that 7.9 megabytes already have been cached by the service worker. And if you want to look into the cache, you can do it here in the cache storage. Here you see the index HTML, register worker, and all the other artifacts that I defined in the preload array of the service worker. Oh, I forgot to show you the preload array that's here. Sorry. The resources to preload I define here in my service worker JS, and these are the resources from my web application, and these are the resources from UI5, and here in the install event handler I add them to the cache. So okay, and now, because everything is cached, we should go into the offline mode, and it should be possible to load the page offline. We will try it. Okay, and we see, okay, the page is built, and we get a response even though we are offline. Now you see here in on the network tab that some resources couldn't be loaded. These resources are described in my documentation. Why they are not loaded? We don't need them at the moment. That's no problem. So we just skip this. But now, as we seem to be finished, and so we walk around in the application a little bit. I clear the cache, the list of loaded files, and whoop, what do we see here? We see that enJSON could not load it, and the application tried to load this. Why is this? This is why, because UI5, we heard it several times today, does not load everything asynchronously and with the preload files of the libraries. This file is loaded synchronously by UI5, and now we have to find a workaround to tell our application that it has to load them into the service worker. That's easy, and to tell UI5 that it should enter it to the preload cache. I just go a little bit deeper in my documentation and tell you how UI5 works under the hood. I found this because I debugged the source code, and I realized, or I discovered, that nearly all resources in UI5, not all, but nearly all resources, seem to be loaded with this require sync function. And the require sync function has the following, or does the following things. It looks into a UI5 owned cache. That's in memory. It looks into this UI5 owned cache if the resource that is required has already been loaded, already been loaded to the cache, and if so, it returns this resource without sending another request to the server, to the web server. If it isn't in the cache, it loads the file either synchronously or asynchronously and then returns the resource. And we don't want this, we want this. So our application has to make sure that all the files that we need for our progressive web applications, for the offline functionality, are preloaded by UI5. And for this purpose, okay, I just go here and close the app. I clear everything, so the service worker gets deleted, the cache gets deleted, and I go back to my source code. And for this purpose of preloading the files to UI5, to the UI5 core, I created a little module I called module preload. Let's copy the source code. Okay, where is it? There. Okay. So what does this module do? It basically exposes one function, one simple function here, preload module. And this preload module creates a module path from a library and resource, and then it sends a jQuery and AJAX request to the server to load the file. And in the success handler of this jQuery get function, it registers the data, the response of the request with the SAP UI5 preload module cache via this function, register preload modules. And that's a secret and this quirk or speciality that we have to keep in mind when we work with SAP UI5 154 or lower. As we heard today, from 156, 158, everything is loaded asynchronously, and then obviously we shouldn't need it anymore. Okay, let's go on. Of course, we have to include this module preload into our index HTML. I copy it here. We then have to make sure that the service worker loads this file. Service worker. I add it here. And we have to make sure that the service worker loads all the files from the UI5 libraries that are loaded synchronously. And I discovered these files for my applications. If you write your own application, there might be other files that cannot be loaded, but in the network tab you see them quite easily. They are read when you are online. Okay, let's add this here to the end. Don't forget a comma here. So we are going here, and now there's one thing left. We of course have to invoke our preload module function, because to tell UI5 to tell UI5 to add it to its own preload cache. So I add it here when everything is done, when the attach init event has been done, when my component has been created. I call the preload module function for these files that are needed in my application. Okay, and let me see. I think I'm at the end with this demo. Yeah, so I show you the result. I start the application again and go to the application tab. Now you see there are 8.2 megabytes. There were 7.9 with the last call, but we loaded a few other files now. The cache is there. Everything's fine. The service worker is working, and we can go offline now again. So let's go offline. Let's refresh the page. It's loading, and the red requests here are the same as last time, which we could ignore. Now I clear the list. I go to my About Me, and now you see the en.json file does not appear any longer, because we told SAP UI5 to add it to the preload cache, and the resync, the require sync function now finds the file in the UI5 cache. But there are 3 files, PNG files, JPEG files, that couldn't be loaded. That are these 3 files. And now I come to the meaningful content again. In our service worker, in the fetch event handler, this is the fetch event handler. The fetch event, I'd show you what it does. The fetch event handler first matches the request in the cache. If it finds them, it goes here through the response and returns the response, tries to fetch it from the server, and or if it's undefined, it tries to fetch it from the server and add it to the cache and so on. If anywhere occurs an error, the catch block is invoked. And in this catch block, I return this cancel SVG file image from my service worker cache. And this is what is done, what the application does here. This is displayed here. When I go online now, and let's go online, let's refresh the page. Now everything can be loaded. Most of the things of the files are loaded, again, are loaded from the service worker. And when I go to the About Me thing here, you see that my warning message, my error image has been replaced by the real images that are now loaded from the web server. So, yeah, this is the demo, and as I mentioned, you can download the documentation and follow the steps step by step at home. I will go back to my presentation and show you some additional information. So now it's the OR phase. You now all have to OR. Question: are you convinced of PWA applications? Maybe not fully, but with UI5 156, 158, it should be much simpler to create progressive web applications. And some additional information. Oh, I have 3 minutes left. I'm good in time. Resourceful resources. There are, in the meantime, there appeared a lot of resources about progressive web applications. Microsoft has built a progressive web application builder that builds a prototype, a basic structure of a progressive web application easily. What web can do, I already showed you. The Google developer pages, Mozilla developer pages are great resources if you want to get into progressive web applications. Then from Google there is a workbox that acts similar like the PWA builder from Microsoft, and there is a UI5 bus that inspired me a bit to do this session here, and that describes how to create a progressive web application of the icon explorer of UI5. And yeah, then who is using PWA? When I did the introduction, I showed you Twitter, Flipboard, but there are many other applications that already work with progressive web applications and that use the offline mode, but also use push notifications. There are Trivago, Telegram, Messenger, Financial Times, Flipkart. Very interesting is this PWA Rocks. This is a collection of PWA applications, so you have many more applications that support PWA. Yeah, and I think I'm quite finished. Yep, okay. That was my presentation. I hope I could interest you to PWAs and you throw away your native app development now and go to UI5 and create progressive web applications, because it's so easy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Helmut.
I did it in time.
Yeah, perfect. That's excellent. You can moderate when does. Thank you. You are part of the team of the UI5con speakers. That was very, very in-deep technical stuff. I'm quite sure we can try this out. I'm not quite sure if Merlin and Matthias are quite fond of the SAP UI require sync module, but well, yeah, to get this up and running, that's quite a good idea to have this as a workaround. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Any questions from here? Nothing to see. Oh, you? You need the box.
Okay.
We have IDP, for example, Cloud IDP in front, and as far as I remember, so we open the cloud platform, we will get redirected to, in our case, Azure as online service for identification. How does this work with PWA and in offline?
I have to admit, I don't know. I didn't try it. I don't know it. No. You have
I will test and report.
Okay. Yeah, would be great. Yeah.
Thanks. Any other questions? Yeah, we're just behind you.
The offline mode in the service worker is something very awesome for the users, because then in offline they can keep on working with the app. But what about the developers? How do you make sure that the service worker and the stuff inside gets invalidated whenever the developer pushes a new version?
That's automatically done by the by the browser. The browser checks if there is a new service worker version, and it does I think I mentioned it. It does a byte comparison. It compares the old service worker code byte by byte with the new service worker code. And if there is a new one, the new service worker code is installed, but it is only activated when there is no other request to the old service worker. That's why I always, wait a moment, that's why I always, where am I? Whoop. I'm lost. Okay. That's why I always close the window, because as long as I have this window opened, and when I now create a new service worker, I can do it for you. We see there is a service worker now. I change the service worker. I add a new version. Go back to my application and wait a moment. So, call a refresh. Now you see that there is a new service worker, but it is waiting to activate, because there was a page, it was my page, my web page, that is already referring to the old service worker, and therefore it cannot be installed. As soon, let's have a look at the version number. This old one is 633, the new one is 637. When I now close the window and open it again, go to the service worker, then I see that 637 has been activated. So the developer doesn't have to do anything. He just creates a new version, and it gets automatically installed without any app store, without any annoying message. We have 70 new applications for you that they must be installed. Don't go into flight mode overnight. Yeah.
Okay, there's another one. Can you give it over there? Whoa!
Yeah. You showed several advantages of web apps over native, but the point you didn't address so much is native capabilities, like fingerprint scan or something. Mostly people go hybrid if they want something, but no, you did not address it. How would you address it?
You were not correct, or you're not correct. Sorry that I have to correct you.
No worries.
I mentioned it. It was in, I think, was it in technical details? I think so. No. Come on. User browser support, I think. I have to go browser support there, yeah. What can web do? I showed you this website, and all this functionality or these features that are marked with the green checkbox or with the green check are supported by the browser on your smartphone. So you can use native features on your smartphone in a web browser. And which features are supported depends on your browser, on your smartphone OS, of course. But the browser and OS producers work on this heavily, and they try to support as much as possible.
All right, that's the answer, yeah.